What's up, y'all? This is TJ with Fake It or Make It. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take this old thickness planer blade out of a Delta thickness planer and turn that into a stupid simple woodworking marking knife. This is going to be a diamond point marking knife, so that means that it's going to be like this. We're going to remove this material and it'll have a point on it, except the main difference is that our bevel, we'll be able to use the bevel on both sides of this. Let's see if I can get it to focus. It'll have a bevel on both sides, so it won't matter if I'm cutting on this side of the ruler or the square. I just have to flip it over so that I can go to the other side, because there will be a bevel, both bevels for each side will be on the same plane. So this area will remain flat and we'll have two sharp edges and a point which to mark with on this. So the first thing I need to do is take this planer blade over here to my Rikon 8-inch bench grinder that's a low RPM bench grinder, and remove the bevels that are on both sides of this planer blade so that I don't have to worry about cutting my hand on it whenever I'm making the handle. This can be a really dangerous maneuver here, so make sure that before you do this, that your worktop here, your work that holds your piece, is nice and flat, and you don't have a huge gap between your work table and the face of the grinding wheel, because you don't want this thing to get sucked in there. And also make sure that you're wearing gloves, because this thing, no matter how dull and worn out it is, it's still extremely sharp, and if this thing gets in a bind, it can grab and cut you or do all kind of crazy stuff. So just be on your A game when you're doing this, and make sure you wear your eye protection. So now that I have both the bevels off the edges of this planer blade, I need to make my diamond point, and that's where the sharp end is going to be. So what I need to do is I have my protractor and I set it to 60 degrees. I've never owned a marking knife, an actual manufactured marking knife, so I'm just going to guess that it has a 60-degree point on it. I just took a black Sharpie and rubbed it all over the end of the planer blade where the point's going to be, and then that way I can see what I'm doing whenever I scratch my bevel angle on there with my scribe here. But there's little hairlines scratched into the Sharpie, and we're gonna lop these corners off to make our diamond point. I just freehand ground this diamond bevel on my low RPM bench grinder, and you got to be really careful. You can see I have a little burnt tip right there. The thinner the metal is, the faster it's going to heat up. Come on, focus. And so what that does is that means that it's going to lose its temper and it's not going to be good. But I was just using the grinder to establish the shape, and it's not perfectly symmetrical, but It's close enough. Okay, so I ripped down 2 of these little pieces of wood off the mystery wood block, and they are 5/16 wide. Let's see if I can get it to focus. They're 5/16 wide, and I really didn't measure the length, but we're just going to take them and sandwich the blade between these 2 pieces of wood here, and then we'll just remove all this extra wood until we get a nice smooth ergonomic handle, just like that. I don't know, I think I am going to put some brass pins in it just to secure it better. Whenever I go to put the epoxy on it, it'll just lock everything down nice and tight, and it'll be just like that. Okay, so I learned a very valuable lesson, and as you can see, whenever I tried to center punch for the pins so I could drill my pins, the end of my blade just snapped off, and you could see just how porous this material was where it broke. And I'm not any kind of professional knife maker or anything, so I didn't realize that this was going to be that brittle. So I'm going to back up, and instead of using pins, because I tried to drill a scrap piece of this planer blade on the drill press with a fresh bit, and it wasn't having it. This stuff is very much hardened. I guess I could just use it like this, but I really want there to be a handle on this. So we're just gonna have to see how it goes, because that was a surprise to me. Luckily, I was wearing my eye protection. Nothing's as ever as simple as it looks on YouTube. Why is it never as simple as it looks on YouTube? Jeez. All right, so being that this went off the rails a little bit, I decided that I would go ahead and use just epoxy in these 2 wooden scales. So what I did was I took some 60 grit sandpaper and I roughed up the steel really good in a crosshatch pattern so that would give the epoxy something to bite into whenever I put my wood scales on both sides. This isn't optimum, but I'm just rolling with it because I think this will make a really good marking knife. But that was definitely a lesson learned, that planer blades are, well, they're pretty hard and brittle. So, but it'll make a good marking knife. Just can't really drill through it, I guess. So, and I took some alcohol after I scuffed this up with the 60 grit and cleaned the metal off as best I could. Now I'm going to mix up some 5-minute epoxy, slather it on the scales and the blade, and then clamp it all together. All right, y'all. So the epoxy has set up for about 5 days, and now I'm ready to take it over to the sander and start rounding this out and making it a little more ergonomic and a little more comfortable to hold. We got probably 1.5 1.75 inches that we need to take off the rear of this. And it's going to be kind of short, but I think it's going to work just fine because it comes up probably 1.5 inches past the top of my hand, and I still have plenty if I'm marking down a side of a piece of wood. So I think this is going to work out pretty good. And being that it's not going to have really any major forces pulling against it or prying on it, the brittleness of the blade I don't think is going to be an issue. And without pins, I think this epoxy will hold it for what it's going to be used for, which is just going to be strictly a marking knife. So let's go ahead and get this thing sanded and sculpted and shaped out so we can start finishing this handle out. Okay, so I just came back from the belt sander, and that was pretty monotonous. That's why I kind of sped up through it, and it really wasn't much to it. I just kind of shaped it till I was happy with the way it feels in my hand. And I kind of went with a flatter profile on both sides of the handle so it doesn't roll whenever I'm holding it, but I can still flip it to one side or the other really easily. And because I use both hands, I'm somewhat ambidextrous, this is comfortable for my left hand and my right hand. And as you can see, this is not just the most beautiful knife ever made, but it will definitely serve a purpose, and it will definitely do its job well. I think it turned out pretty good so far. It still needs to be a little bit sharper, but right now I'm going to tape the blade off, and I'm going to start putting some Zinsser shellac on the handle. I normally use boiled linseed oil, but because it's so cold it would take forever to dry. So I'm just going to use some shellac on this, and we'll see how it turns out. All right, so here's the finished product. I have 3 coats of shellac on the handle scales, and then I went over the handle with some 4/0 steel wool to kind of give it a nice satin finish. And then I took some Johnson's paste wax and coated the whole knife, blade and all, with the Johnson's paste wax, and that'll help kind of keep the rust off of it and protect the wood, and it just gives it a nice feel to it. So that's it, y'all. A really stupid simple marking knife made out of an old planer blade. Cool thing is I had 2 planer blades, and you can get 2 marking knives out of 1 planer blade, so you essentially have 4 marking knives. This was kind of hard to sharpen because of its extreme hardness, but once I got it good and beveled and had a nice flat surface on the back, and I was able to polish both sides, it actually got pretty sharp. Now, I'm not going to say this is going to do the shave your arm sharp, or you know, just you could just whip it through a piece of paper like it's nothing. It will cut paper and it will shave, but it mostly just cuts you like a dull razor. But the most important thing is that this thing is for cutting wood grain and marking a cut line for your saw to follow, and this thing will do that absolutely perfectly. Like I said, it won't win any beauty pageants, but it is functional, and I made it, and it didn't cost me a thing. just a little bit of time. Being as I have more time than I have money, stuff like this happens. So I'm proud of it. I'm glad the way it came out. I like it, and I intend to get a lot of good use out of it. So if you liked the video, be sure to hit that like button, and if you've ever made a marking knife, be sure to let me know down in the comment section. I'd like to hear about it and see what kind of steel you used. But anyway, y'all stay safe, and y'all come back now.